I sat in the suffocatingly vast living room of the mansion, idly spinning the crystal glass Mother had just filled with apple juice. A faint trace of mint hung in the air, but I couldn't manage even one sip. The room was exactly the same as when I was a child. Vaulted ceilings, an Austrian crystal chandelier that glittered like ice. Cream-colored Italian leather sofas that no one dared sink into too hard for fear of creasing them. Everything was flawless. Everything was exorbitantly expensive. Everything felt foreign to me. My name is Trevor Kellen, a photographer who lives in a tiny studio apartment in Bellevue. The place I was sitting in right now was not my home. This was my parents' house, or more accurately, my father's palace. Billionaire Creed Kellen, the tycoon behind Kellen Retail Group, a man who could buy an entire city block on a whim. And to him, I was nothing more than the useless son who liked to wander around taking meaningless photographs. Mother sat beside me, her hand resting gently on my knee the way she always did just before Father walked in. Her name is Saria. She is 57, gentle and kind, with warm brown eyes. She is still beautiful, her long black hair tied low. She has a soft smile that has always made me feel at peace whenever I'm near her. "Are you well, Trevor? It's been so long since you came home," she said softly. I nodded and forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mom. Work's fine." She knew I was lying. She always knows, simply because she is my mother, the woman who watched me grow up. Then the study door swung open. The measured click of leather shoes echoed across the imported oak floor. My father entered without looking at me first. He glanced only at the Rolex on his wrist, then lowered himself into the armchair opposite me. He is 63, hair cropped short and silver white, square jaw, eyes sharp as blades. He wore a charcoal suit and a tightly knotted tie even though he was at home. "I don't have much time." "What do you want?" he asked directly. No greeting, no "how are you?" His low, cold voice was so familiar it made my heart contract. I drew a deep breath. I had rehearsed this sentence for a solid week, in front of the mirror, in the car, even while washing dishes. But now, sitting here in front of him, the words jammed in my throat. I'd like to borrow Grandpa's Bentley, just for a few days. Ivy and I are planning to drive up to the mountains to shoot autumn foliage. Silence. 1 second. 2 seconds. 10 seconds. Father raised an eyebrow. The corner of his mouth curved into that familiar contemptuous arc. "You want to borrow the 1954 Bentley?" he repeated slowly as though chewing each syllable. "To take some little writer girl joyriding?" "Ivy, sir," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Her name is Ivy." He gave a dry, humorless laugh that cracked like breaking glass. "The wandering photographer wants to drive a classic car worth a fortune. That's rich." My heart pounded against my ribs. Heat rose to my face, but I was not allowed to lose my temper. Never in front of him. "I'll drive carefully," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "I know its value. I just want to experience it once. Besides, you never drive it yourself. It just sits there." Father stared at me, his gaze drilling straight through. "Exactly because I don't touch it that it's still in perfect condition," he growled. "And you? You ride around on that beat-up motorcycle taking pictures no one buys. If I hand the car over to you and you wrap it around a tree, then what?" "Creed, calm down," Mother said gently but firmly. "That car belonged to your father. He left it to the whole family. Trevor is his grandson too. He's only asking to borrow it for a few days." Father whipped his head toward her. I saw his jaw clench. But Mother didn't back down. She rarely opposed him, but whenever she spoke up for me, he relented. Just a little. "That car is a keepsake," he said, voice lower but still cutting. "A memento of someone who is gone. Not a toy for my dear son to show off to his girlfriend." I swallowed hard. "I'm not showing off, Dad," I managed. I just want to feel close to Grandpa again. He's been gone a long time, and I thought maybe his things, the things he loved, could bring a little of his warmth back." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. And for one fleeting instant I saw it. Something flashed in my father's eyes. Not anger, panic. Then it vanished. instantly replaced by his usual disdain. He was silent for so long I could hear the wall clock ticking. Finally, he stood, walked to the liquor cabinet, and poured himself a whiskey. He didn't offer me any. He never has. 3 days, he said without turning around. Only 3 days. Do not exceed 50 miles an hour. No smoking inside. No food or drink. And if that girl so much as leaves a smudge on the leather... He turned back. His stare was so cold my spine went icy. You'll pay a price far higher than the car itself, Trevor. I nodded frantically, heart racing so hard it felt ready to burst from my chest. Yes, sir. I promise I'll take perfect care of it. Mother smiled, eyes shining. She squeezed my hand as if to say, You did it. Father pulled an old key from his suit pocket, worn leather fob, heavy brass bow. He set it on the table beside the cabinet. Don't disappoint me again, he said, then turned and walked straight upstairs without another word. I picked up the key. It was cold and heavier than I expected. The faint scent of aged leather and old gasoline rose from it, carrying memories from decades past. I remembered sitting on Grandpa's lap while he drove that Bentley, his warm hands over mine on the wheel. One day you'll drive this car, Trevor, he had said, when you're grown and you know how to cherish it. I never imagined that day would arrive like this, 5 years after he was gone, with my father looking at me like I was the enemy, and with the chilling certainty that this car was more than just a car. It was guarding some secret my father did not want anyone to touch. Mother kissed my forehead before I left. Be careful, sweetheart, she whispered. And don't let your father make you sad. I nodded, but I already knew sadness was an old companion. What I felt now wasn't sadness, it was a deep, powerful unease. I stepped out of the mansion's living room and headed toward the garage, the key lying ice cold in my palm. The vast garage yawned open before me, stark white LED lights pouring down and turning the 1954 Bentley into a gleaming black jewel amid the darkness. Beside it stretched a long row of million-dollar supercars, Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, lined up impeccably like a collection that flaunted the Kellen family's power and wealth. I stood there for a long moment, eyes fixed solely on the Bentley, not daring to touch it yet. Its beauty was too perfect, too classic. The graceful curves, the chrome radiator grille sparkling like stars, the endlessly long body a work of art from a bygone era. This was more than a car. It was a fragment of memory about my grandfather, the only man in the family who had ever made me feel truly loved. I opened the driver's door and slid inside. The scent of aged leather, polished wood, and a faint trace of gasoline from decades past rushed into my nostrils, enveloping me like a warm embrace from the past. I inserted the key, turned it gently, and the engine roared to life with a deep, resonant growl. Powerful, like an old beast awakening after 5 long years of slumber in the garage. For the first time that day I smiled, a genuine smile from the bottom of my heart. My mood lifted as if a heavy burden had been shed. At last I was free from the stifling atmosphere of the mansion, from my father's icy glare and the bitter words he reserved for me. Now it was just me, Grandpa's car, the open road ahead, and Ivy waiting at our rendezvous. I drove out through the mansion gates, the wheels gliding smoothly over the white gravel. The crimson sunset in the western sky painted the windshield red, casting an ethereal glow over everything. I switched on the vintage radio and caught a soft jazz tune from the 1950s, the kind Grandpa must have listened to. The mellow melody made me smile to myself. I accelerated a little, feeling the engine's power transmit through the walnut steering wheel. Wind whistled through the slightly open window, carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding gardens. Everything felt perfect, and I imagined the upcoming trip with Ivy would be the most beautiful time. We'd head to the mountains, I'd take photos, she'd write, and we'd laugh together like 2 kids escaping the pressure-filled adult world. Our meeting spot was a small cafe by Lake Washington where we'd first met over a year ago. I parked right in front, the headlights sweeping across the lake's shimmering surface under the fading evening light. Ivy was already there, wearing an adorable oversized camel sweater, her long brown hair cascading over her shoulders. She was a profound and refined writer, always carrying a notebook to jot down sudden ideas. When she saw me, her eyes lit up and a radiant smile bloomed on her lips, the smile that made me forget all my weariness every time I saw it. "Oh my God, Trevor, are you serious?" She ran over and threw her arms around me the moment I stepped out of the car, her vanilla sandalwood perfume making me want to kiss her right then and there. "I thought you were joking. This is a real Bentley?" I laughed heartily and planted a loud kiss on her hair. "It's real, babe. Dad reluctantly lent it to me, but don't ask for details. It's a long story and none of it's pleasant." Ivy let go of me, but her eyes immediately locked onto the car. Then she froze, as if turned to ice. It lasted only a few seconds, but I noticed the shift instantly. Her gaze wasn't ordinary admiration. It was an indescribable shock, as if some invisible force surrounded the car and pulled her into another world. Her lips parted, her body leaned forward slightly, eyes unblinking, the wind rustling leaves around her while she remained motionless. "Ivy, what's wrong?" I called softly, touching her shoulder in concern. She blinked rapidly, startled, and her smile returned at once as if nothing had happened. "Nothing. I'm fine. It's just so beautiful. I've never seen a classic car this stunning outside of movies." She stepped closer, gently running her hand over the hood as if stroking a rare animal, her eyes sparkling with delight. "Look at these curves. It's a genuine work of art. Are you sure your dad really lent it to you and you didn't steal it?" I burst into easy laughter, feeling truly relieved for the first time that day. "It's legit, but only for 3 days and no scratches allowed." Ivy spun toward me, eyes shining like a child who'd just seen a long-dreamed-of toy. "Can I drive it? Just a short stretch, please. I really want to feel it." I looked at her, then at the car, then back at her. Ivy wasn't the type to obsess over cars. She preferred books and could sit for hours by a window writing rather than caring about engines or speed. But right now she was utterly captivated, and I couldn't bring myself to refuse. "All right, but be careful, it's old." I opened the driver's door for her in that chivalrous, old-fashioned way she always teased me about, and Ivy slipped in gently as if afraid of hurting the car. Her hands rested on the wheel, eyes closing briefly to savor the classic luxury. "Oh my God, 100% real leather, walnut steering wheel. I feel like I'm in Casablanca." I leaned against the doorframe outside, smiling as I watched her, thinking how beautiful she was. At 27, she could still be as innocently youthful as an 18-year-old, especially when excited like this. But then everything happened so fast I couldn't react. The instant Ivy's hands tightened slightly on the wheel, her whole body jerked as if hit by a powerful electric shock. Her face went ashen, eyes wide with panic, staring straight ahead at the space in front of the wheel. Her breathing became ragged, chest heaving violently, pupils dilated, lips trembling without forming words. "Ivy!" I lunged forward in terror, reaching to pull her out, but she yanked her hands off the wheel before I could touch her, a choked scream of horror escaping her throat. Her body shook uncontrollably like a malaria fever. She tried to push the door open but had no strength, slumping against the seat as if about to collapse. I flung the door wide and pulled her out immediately, wrapping my arms tightly around her shoulders as she nearly fell into me. Cold sweat poured down her forehead, soaking her hair and sticking it to her cheeks. "Ivy, what's happening? Talk to me." She couldn't answer right away, just trembling in my arms, and I felt every spasm ripple through her. My heart pounded with fear. I had no idea what the hell had just happened. It took a long while after I'd helped her sit on the curb for her to regain composure. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. Did you see anything?" Her voice broke, still shaking. There was someone in the car." "Who?" "There's no one," I said, trying to sound calming even though I was rattled. She shook her head frantically, clutching my shirt as if letting go would send her plummeting. "Not a real person, but an old man. He appeared right in front of the wheel, face purple, eyes milky white, mouth moving, begging me for help. He said he was murdered. He said it wasn't an accident." A chill ran through my entire body as she continued, voice faltering between shudders. He was wearing a dark blue shirt, silk tie, silver hair combed back, a small mole on his left cheek, deep-set eyes, high nose. He looked at me pleading, then said, "I was murdered, not an accident. Tell my grandson." Every detail she described matched my grandfather, Augustus Kellen, perfectly. The dark blue shirt he wore most often, the mole on his left cheek I remembered clearly from childhood when I sat on his lap, the distinctive way he combed his hair back. I had never shown Ivy a photo of him. I'd only mentioned his name in passing once. "Ivy, what are you saying?" My voice came out hoarse, throat tight. "How could you know those details?" She stared at me, eyes still wild with terror. "He said he was your grandfather, Augustus Kellen. He was really murdered, not lost at sea like everyone thinks." I collapsed onto the curb beside her, my mind reeling as if I'd been punched. 5 years ago, Grandpa went fishing alone and vanished. They found only the boat adrift, no body. Dad said the waves took him and the family held a funeral without a coffin. Now someone who had never met him, never seen a picture, was describing him down to the last detail. We sat there for a long time. I held her to keep her warm and told her about Grandpa to confirm every detail. And she nodded frantically, her face growing even paler because she didn't understand it either. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to ruin our trip." "It's okay," I said, even though my heart was racing with fear and doubt. "We're still going, right? I still want to go with you." She looked at me for a moment, then nodded weakly, though her eyes remained haunted. "Let's go. I don't want you to be sad because of me." We got back in the car. This time I drove, Ivy in the passenger seat, gripping the seatbelt tightly, occasionally glancing at the wheel as if something might reappear. I tried to lighten the mood with cheerful talk about the scenic road ahead, the autumn pine forests, the photos I'd take of her. But both of us knew the trip had changed completely. It was no longer the carefree adventure we'd planned. As I accelerated onto the highway, the evening chill whistling through the windows, I couldn't help glancing in the rearview mirror at the gleaming car behind us. It still looked stunning under the streetlights, but now every thought of the steering wheel sent a shiver down my spine. Was Grandpa really trying to say something through Ivy? Or was it all imagination? Deep down, I could feel something terrible looming, and I was afraid to face it. The trip we had dreamed about for so long turned into a heavy obsession right from the very first miles. I drove along the winding mountain road, trying to focus on the towering pine canopies on both sides and the endless expanse of fiery autumn leaves. But the atmosphere inside the car remained strangely stifling. Ivy sat in the passenger seat, gripping the seatbelt so tightly that her knuckles turned white, her eyes occasionally darting toward the steering wheel as if fearing that purple-faced old man would reappear at any moment. I tried to talk to dispel the heaviness, telling her about childhood memories of Grandpa taking me on outings in this very car, how he laughed heartily when he first taught me to hold the wheel. But every time I mentioned him, Ivy shrank back, as if those memories were touching an unhealed wound inside her. "Ivy, are you okay?" I asked her countless times during the journey, my voice as gentle as I could manage but unable to hide the rising anxiety in my chest. She nodded and forced a smile, but I knew she was doing it for my sake. "I'm fine. It's just, I still get chills down my spine whenever I think about it." We stopped beside a small lake in the forest to rest. I set up the tent, built a fire, and tried to create the romantic evening we had planned. Roasting marshmallows, lying under the stars, holding each other by the crackling flames. But every time the wind rustled the leaves, Ivy flinched and curled up, and I couldn't stop thinking about what she had told me. Grandpa's face kept flashing in my mind, and the final message he wanted to convey through Ivy, "Tell my grandson I was murdered," echoed in my head like a whisper from the grave. The first night passed in oppressive silence. We lay side by side but couldn't sleep deeply, only dozing in fits because of invisible nightmares. The next morning, as the sun peeked over the mountains, Ivy sat up, hugged her knees, and looked at me with eyes red from lack of sleep. "Trevor, can we go home early? I can't take it anymore. I'm so scared. I nodded immediately. I didn't blame her at all. I myself was being crushed by an unease so heavy it was hard to breathe. What had happened was no longer a fun ghost story to tell around the campfire. It had become something real, a secret lurking around the car I was driving. The two of us packed up in tense silence, not saying a word to each other. The trip ended 2 full days earlier than planned. We drove back without speaking, only the steady growl of the engine and the wind whistling through the window cracks. I dropped Ivy off first at her small apartment in Seattle, hugging her tightly in front of the door. Get some rest, okay? I'll call you later. And oh, thank you for trying. She kissed me goodbye. You be careful too, Trevor. I have a feeling. This isn't over yet. Her words stabbed my heart like a knife. I drove away with my mind reeling, not heading straight home, but turning directly into the familiar maintenance garage on the outskirts of Bellevue, the place the Kellen family had entrusted with every precious car for years. I couldn't let anything happen to this Bentley, no matter how minor. My father had warned me clearly. Even one scratch would be enough to unleash his fury, and after everything that had happened, I didn't want any more trouble from him. The garage belonged to Hank Mitchell, tucked away on a quiet street. Hank was a master mechanic whom my grandfather had trusted absolutely. He had serviced this Bentley since it was brand new, and after Grandpa's death, Hank remained the only person my father allowed to touch the car. I parked in front of the garage and stepped out, exhausted but forced a smile when I saw Hank wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. "Good Lord, Trevor. Long time no see," he exclaimed, eyes widening in surprise when he spotted the gleaming black Bentley behind me. "You little rascal, you gave me a start. You're actually driving Mr. Augustus's car. I thought it would stay locked away in your dad's garage forever." I gave an awkward smile and shook his hand firmly. Hank was over 70 now, hair snow white, face etched with wrinkles, but his eyes still sharp and his grip as strong as ever. "I borrowed it from Dad for a few days, sir. My girlfriend and I were going on a trip, but it didn't go smoothly. I want you to give it a full check, tires, engine, oil, everything. I don't want anything that could make Dad angry." Hank nodded and ran his hand over the hood as if greeting an old friend. "All right, kid. I'll pull it inside. It's been ages since I last got my hands on her." He drove the car into the bay. I sat on an old wooden bench in the corner, sipping black coffee. The steady clink of metal tools echoed, Hank muttering something to his young assistant, and I tried not to let my thoughts run wild. But I couldn't. The image of Ivy trembling on the curb kept replaying along with the face of Grandpa she had described. I pulled out my phone and texted Ivy that I was getting the car serviced and would call her tonight, but my hands shook as I typed. Everything went normally for nearly an hour. Hank checked the tires, changed the oil, cleaned the brake system. Everything remarkably stable for a classic car that had been dormant for years. He even praised how the Bentley still ran as smoothly as the day it left the factory thanks to my family's meticulous care. But then when Hank opened the small glove compartment on the left, a rarely touched space that usually held only odds and ends like paper maps or an old cigarette case, he suddenly froze and fell silent. I stood up and walked over, a bad feeling creeping in. "What is it, Mr. Hank?" He didn't answer right away. Just reached deep inside and rummaged for a moment before pulling out a small black device, covered in dust, but intact. It looked like an old GPS unit from the early 2000s. Tiny screen, protruding buttons, a stubby antenna, something practically extinct now. "That's odd," Hank muttered, wiping the dust off with his rag. "I don't remember Mr. Augustus ever installing this, though it makes sense. He liked vintage stuff, probably used an old GPS to match the car, but why hide it so deep?" My heart pounded as I stared at the device. An eerie premonition surged through me like a cold wave down my spine. Are you sure it's Grandpa's? Does it still work?" Hank gave a dry chuckle and turned it over in his hands. "Let me check. These things run on long-lasting batteries. There might still be old data inside." He took it to his workbench and plugged it into the garage's ancient computer via a dusty USB port, recounting old stories about my grandfather. How Mr. Augustus would bring the car in for repairs and sit puffing cigars while chatting with him for hours. I stood beside him, burning with impatience, unable to tear my eyes from the screen as the software began reading the data. After some fiddling, Hank looked up at me with a mix of surprise and concern. "It works fine, Trevor. Memory's fully intact. All the previous trips are still logged. I can export the file for you if you want." I nodded instantly, my voice hoarse with nerves. "Yes, please. I want to see it." Hank asked no questions, just copied the data to a small USB drive and handed it to me. I paid the service bill, a hefty sum, but I didn't care, and drove home with a heavy heart, feeling as if I had accidentally touched a crucial clue I should never have uncovered. The entire way back, I didn't play music or roll down the windows. I just drove in silence, staring at the USB in the console as if it were staring back at me. Back in my small Bellevue studio, I locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat at my computer. Night had fallen, rain pattered softly against the window, the steady drumming making the atmosphere even heavier. I plugged in the USB and opened the GPS file, a long list of trips logged by date and time, coordinates precise to the second. I scrolled straight to the oldest remaining data, the exact moment my father said Grandpa disappeared, 5 years ago, the day he went fishing alone and never returned. My heart pounded so hard it hurt as I examined the final recorded journey. The car left the mansion early in the morning, heading toward the coast as Dad had described. But then, it stopped for over 2 hours at a completely unfamiliar location deep in the Snoqualmie forest, nowhere near the route to the beach. The coordinates were clear, the timing exact, no mistake possible. Only after that did the car continue to the beach, stop there briefly, and then the data ended. I sat frozen before the screen, hands trembling so badly I had to grip the desk. It was impossible. Dad said Grandpa drove to the beach, parked, hopped in his boat to fish alone, and was lost to a massive wave. But this data showed the car had lingered for hours somewhere else entirely before reaching the coast. Who drove it after that? And why hide the GPS so thoroughly? A chill raced down my spine. Perhaps Grandpa Augustus Kellen's disappearance at sea never happened the way my father claimed. And this car, the one my father didn't want anyone to touch, had been guarding that secret for 5 long years. I shut down the computer and sat in the dark, listening to the rain while an icy dread filled me. Now I was certain. Grandpa wasn't just speaking through Ivy. He was leading me to the truth. And that truth, I feared, would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. The next morning, I drove the Bentley back to the mansion with a heavier heart than ever, as if a massive rock were pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. A light drizzle fell, tiny droplets clinging to the windshield and being swept back and forth by the wipers in a monotonous rhythm that did nothing to dispel the whirlwind of thoughts in my mind. I had barely slept at all the night before, lying there staring at the pitch-black ceiling while the computer screen with those cold GPS coordinates flashed relentlessly every time I closed my eyes. The car had stopped in the forest for over 2 hours before reaching the sea. Who drove it after that? And why had my father hidden the GPS so meticulously, as if he feared someone would discover it? I parked neatly in front of the mansion, turned off the engine, and sat motionless in the driver's seat for a long while, my hands resting lightly on the wheel but not daring to grip it tightly for fear the cold leather would remind me of what Ivy had described. This car was no longer merely a family heirloom. It had become a silent witness guarding a horrifying secret I had unwittingly uncovered. The mansion's front door opened before I could even step out and ring the bell. My father stood there in a luxurious black silk robe, his silver-white hair combed back neatly as always, but his eyes remained sharp, cold, and wary as ever. He glanced at me once, then his gaze immediately shifted to the car behind me, and I clearly saw him freeze for a brief moment. His shoulders tensed slightly, as if he'd been punched invisibly in the gut, his face paling for an instant. "You're back this early?" he asked, his voice striving for calm, but I could hear the tension lurking beneath that icy veneer. Was the car tampered with in any way? Any scratches? I shook my head slowly, trying to keep my voice steady so as not to betray the surging anxiety. It's fine, Dad. Everything's intact, just as before. I had it thoroughly checked. He nodded faintly, but his eyes stayed glued to the car's body as if searching for some invisible scratch that could ignite his rage. I took a deep breath, knowing that if I didn't ask now, I would never muster the courage again. The suspicion had built up too much. I could no longer stay silent. Dad, I began, my voice trembling slightly but trying to hold firm. I want to ask you about Grandpa, about the day he disappeared all those years ago. Why do you always dodge the subject whenever I bring it up, refusing to say anything? The air around us suddenly turned heavy as lead, as if the whole world were holding its breath. My father whipped around to stare at me, and I clearly saw a flash of panic in his eyes, just for a fleeting moment, before he quickly rebuilt his familiar cold, authoritative facade that he used to dominate everyone. But I had seen it, and it made my heart beat faster. Your grandfather has been dead a long time, he growled, enunciating each word, his voice dropping into a threatening rumble. A very long time. Stop digging up the past, Trevor. Let him rest in peace. But I think something doesn't add up, I tried to explain, my voice shaking from a mix of fear and determination. Ivy sensed something strange from this car. She saw Grandpa appear. He said, he was murdered. My father let out a dry, humorless laugh, devoid of any joy, only contempt and pent-up fury. That delusional writer girl of yours? He stepped closer, his voice lowering with disdain. She's making up stories to extort money from our family, isn't she? The filthy type who spews nonsense to get attention. How many times have I told you, stay away from people like that? My heart constricted as if someone were squeezing it. Don't talk about her like that, I shot back immediately, my voice rising in anger. Ivy isn't that kind of person. She really saw Grandpa, and I found the GPS hidden in the glove compartment. The car stopped in the Snoqualmie forest for over 2 hours before reaching the sea. That wasn't just an accident, was it, Dad? He fell silent instantly, his face turning ashen in a split second. I thought he might collapse. Then he lunged forward, grabbing my collar so hard I nearly fell backward, his hot breath blasting into my face with rage. His eyes were bloodshot, veins bulging in his neck, and his voice trembled with exploding fury. What do you want, Trevor? He roared, his tone both furious and laced with a fear he couldn't hide. To destroy this family? To smear me, to smear the entire Kellen name? I forbid you. Never mention your grandfather's death again. And cut ties with that crazy writer girl. If I hear you bring this up one more time, I'll make sure you have nothing left. I stood frozen, not from fear, though his grip on my collar was painfully tight, but because I saw clearly in his eyes that it wasn't pure anger. It was deep terror, the dread of a horrifying secret being exposed. I pried his hands off my collar, stepped back to regain my composure, then turned and walked away without another word, leaving him standing motionless in the vast hallway, his heavy breathing echoing. As I drove away from the mansion in my old Ford, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw my father still standing in the doorway, his face ghostly pale under the dim yellow light, looking more lonely and aged than ever. The days that followed were pure hell for me. I couldn't sleep at all, lying in bed with my mind spinning endlessly. Ivy's trembling account of Grandpa's face, the cold GPS coordinates marking a stop in the forest, and my father's over-the-top reaction. The panicked look he couldn't conceal. I tossed and turned all night, cold sweat soaking me despite the chilly apartment as winter approached, and every brief doze ended with me jolting awake from nightmares. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove straight to Ivy's apartment. She opened the door with eyes red from sleepless nights herself, and without a word, we threw ourselves into a long, tight embrace right on the threshold, as if letting go would mean losing each other forever. I told her everything, the hidden GPS, the Snoqualmie forest, my father's terrified reaction when questioned. She listened without interrupting, gripping my hand tightly, and when I finished, she looked at me with eyes full of pity and deep concern. "You're not crazy, Trevor," she whispered, her voice soft but resolute. "I believe you completely. And I can help you." I looked up sharply, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. "How can you help?" Ivy took a deep breath as if gathering all her courage. "If you have something truly personal to your grandfather, something he touched often or carried with him before he died, I can follow the memories still lingering in it. I've tried it a few times with old objects. It's not always clear, but we can try." My heart raced as if it would burst from my chest. I immediately thought of the old leather strap watch Grandpa had given me on my 18th birthday. He had said, "This has been with me for 40 years. Now it's yours. Take care of it. It holds my soul." I still wore it every day, even though the crystal was scratched and it ran a few minutes slow. I unclasped the watch from my wrist, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it, and handed it to Ivy. "Be careful," I whispered. She nodded, sat on the sofa, and placed the watch in her palm. I sat close beside her, holding my breath. At first, everything was calm. Ivy just closed her eyes and breathed steadily to focus. But then suddenly her body tensed like a bowstring pulled to its limit. Her face went white, lips pressed tight. The exact reaction as before when she touched the Bentley's steering wheel. I wanted to shake her awake but didn't dare, only gripping her hand tighter and whispering, "Ivy, hang in there, love." Then a voice emerged, but it was no longer Ivy's usual voice. Hoarse, halting, as if coming from far away. "I left the house early in the morning, told no one, just said I was going fishing, but I knew they wanted to meet me in the forest." My heart nearly stopped. She continued, "They went mad over the new will. I had changed it, left everything to my grandson Trevor. They couldn't stand it. Then they strangled me from the back seat. I couldn't breathe anymore." Right after, Ivy let out a pained cry, dropped the watch to the floor, and collapsed into my arms, her whole body shaking as if on the verge of collapse. I held her tightly, tears streaming from my eyes without my realizing, my heart pounding wildly at the horrifying truth just revealed. Ivy looked up at me, eyes brimming with tears, but her gaze more resolute than ever. "Trevor, your grandfather was really murdered, and the person who did it is someone in your family." I hurriedly scribbled down every detail in a notebook, my hands trembling so much the writing was barely legible. I knew I was standing on the edge of a vast, terrifying secret about Grandpa's death, one that could destroy everything. And now, there was no turning back. We didn't wait another second. That very evening, after Ivy had calmed down and finished the warm cup of water I'd made for her, we sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment to plan. The air was still heavy, the burnt coffee smell from the pot lingering, but we both knew time was running out. If Grandpa had led us here through Ivy, through the watch, we had to act before everything was erased. I opened the map on my phone and entered the exact coordinates from the GPS data Hank had exported. A point deep in Snoqualmie Forest, over 2 hours' drive from the city, where paved roads vanished and only rough dirt tracks remained. "Are you sure, Trevor?" Ivy asked, her voice still weak after the terrifying trance, but her eyes more resolute than ever. "If we find something, everything will change forever." I gripped her hand tightly, feeling the warmth from her palm flow into me like the only strength I had left. "I'm sure. Grandpa's waiting for us. We have to do this for him." We prepared all night. I drove to my apartment to grab the collapsible shovel I always took on wilderness shoots, powerful flashlights, gloves, large plastic bags for evidence, and my professional camera to document everything clearly. Ivy packed water, snacks, and a thick jacket. She said the forest was bone-chilling this season, especially at dusk. We didn't sleep. We just sat together talking, trying to stay calm by holding each other tightly. But we both knew tomorrow would be the day our lives changed forever. Dawn broke under a gray sky heavy with low clouds as we set off in my old pickup truck. The highway was smooth at first, But the deeper we went into Snoqualmie Forest, the worse the roads became. Asphalt gave way to rutted red dirt tracks full of potholes and jagged rocks barely wide enough for one vehicle. Towering trees lined both sides, their dense canopies blocking the sky and turning daylight into a dim twilight. The smell of damp earth, rotting leaves, and fresh pine rushed in through the cracked windows, but the atmosphere was no longer poetic. It was ominous, threatening. Ivy sat in the passenger seat, clutching the printed map, occasionally directing me left or right based on the phone's GPS. "Turn right at that bend. Slow down. It's slippery." Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to stay steady for my sake. I drove slowly, tires sinking into the mud, the engine growling in protest on steep inclines. Some sections were so narrow that branches scraped the truck's sides with a screech, and I had to lean out to avoid boulders scattered in the path. My heart pounded the whole way, not from the rough terrain, but because we were getting closer to the truth, a truth that would forever alter my world. It took over 3 hours to reach the closest point the truck could go. Ahead lay only a narrow footpath choked with tangled roots and thick leaf litter. I parked on the roadside, killed the engine, and sat still for a moment, taking deep breaths to steady myself. Ivy looked at me, eyes glistening but full of determination. "Let's go. He's waiting." We shouldered our backpacks, shovel, flashlights, camera, and hiked deep into the forest. The trail grew harder. Our feet sank into the wet, decaying leaves, the chirping of insects mixing with the wind howling through the treetops. The biting cold seeped through our jackets, and I realized the forest was utterly isolated. No people, no engines, just our footsteps echoing and our labored breathing. Finally, after nearly an hour of walking, Ivy stopped abruptly. She pointed ahead, whispering as if afraid to wake someone. "There, that's the spot." I followed her finger and my heart stopped. Before us was a small clearing amid the dense pines, dominated by a large moss-covered boulder that looked like a natural tombstone. Beside it was a slight mound of earth raised above the surrounding ground, unlike the flat, evenly settled soil elsewhere. Wild grass grew sparsely, but the mound was clearly newer, as if someone had hastily covered it years ago. Ivy froze, eyes wide, staring at the mound. I see him," she whispered, voice shaking with emotion. "Mr. Augustus is standing right there, his eyes so sad. He's been waiting for someone to find him." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. A chill ran down my spine despite my thick jacket. Instinct screamed. The truth was right beneath our feet. I couldn't wait any longer. I dropped the backpack, pulled out the shovel, and began digging. Each thrust into the earth felt like a blow to my own heart. The soil was wet, heavy, laced with small roots, splattering onto my clothes. I dug slowly, carefully, sweat pouring down despite the cold. Ivy stood beside me, flashlight beam steady, eyes locked on the mound as if afraid to miss anything. The shovel's rhythmic thud echoed in the deathly silent forest, and every layer of soil turned made my pulse race faster. After about half an hour, though it felt like a century, the blade struck something soft, not rock or root. I knelt, brushed away the dirt with my hands, and uncovered a thick black plastic sheet, rotted by time but still mostly intact. My hands shook as I pulled it back, and then I froze. A human skeleton lay curled in the shallow pit, still clad in clothes I remembered vividly. The dark blue shirt Grandpa wore while gardening, beige khaki pants, and the polished brown leather shoes he proudly boasted were from Italy. I collapsed to the ground, the shovel clattering beside me, and burst into sobs like a child. Tears streamed uncontrollably, my chest aching with pain, shock, and surging rage. The man I respected most, who had shielded me from my father throughout my childhood, who taught me kindness and photography, he had been buried silently in this forest for 5 years like discarded trash. I hugged my knees, sobbing until I could barely breathe, my cries echoing through the woods and startling birds into flight. Ivy knelt beside me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders, tears rolling down her cheeks. We sat there for a long time, in the cold forest beside Grandpa's makeshift grave. When I regained some composure, I wiped my eyes and began piecing everything together. The GPS data ended here. Grandpa's words threw Ivy about being strangled from the back seat. The new will, everything pointed to one conclusion. Augustus's death was no accident. This was premeditated murder, and my father might be part of this horrific crime. I voiced it to Ivy, my voice hoarse from crying. Dad, he's involved. He knows. Ivy flinched, her face paling in the flashlight's glow. I saw it too. During the trance with the watch, I vaguely saw two men beside the car. One tall, silver hair combed back, very much like your father's features. Her words were the final knife to my heart. I reached for my phone to call the police, already dialing 911, but Ivy gripped my hand tightly. Don't. Your father's too powerful. He has money, connections. He could erase everything before the police arrive. We need stronger evidence, more time. I looked at her, heart bleeding but mind clearing. She was right. Reporting now would alert my father. Everything would vanish. The remains moved, the forest bulldozed, and we'd have nothing. With a bleeding heart but sharper focus than ever, I photographed everything with my professional camera. Every angle of the pit, the skeleton, the clothes, even the GPS coordinates and surrounding traces. I collected soil samples, fabric scraps from Grandpa's clothes, and sealed them in plastic bags. We refilled the hole, camouflaged the mound so no one would notice, and quietly left the forest as night fell. The entire drive back, I said nothing, just holding Ivy's hand tightly. We would investigate silently, gather more evidence without alerting anyone in the family. Because now I wasn't just seeking justice for Grandpa. I also had to protect myself and Ivy from those willing to kill to keep the secret. We arrived back in the city when it was pitch black, the dim yellow streetlights shining down on the rain-slicked roads, creating hazy pools of light like unhealed wounds. I dropped Ivy off at her apartment first, hugging her tightly outside the door, feeling her heartbeat racing no less than mine. Get some rest, I whispered, my voice hoarse from exhaustion and the lingering emotions from the forest. I'll call you as soon as there's anything new. She nodded, eyes red-rimmed but forcing a faint smile. You be careful too, Trevor. Don't do anything alone. I drove to my apartment, but I couldn't sleep that night. The image of Grandpa's skeleton haunted me relentlessly. The next morning, I decided to act. I couldn't just sit and wait anymore. I searched online for a reputable private investigator in Seattle, someone who had worked for wealthy families and knew how to keep secrets. I met him in a secluded little cafe, wearing a hoodie pulled low over my head so no one would recognize me. His name was Victor Ruiz, about 50 years old, with a scarred face and eyes sharp as razors. I need you to tail my father, I said bluntly, voice low so no one could overhear. Creed Kellen. Every activity, every meeting, everywhere he goes, especially anything related to 5 years ago, the day my grandfather disappeared. Victor raised an eyebrow but didn't ask many questions. He was used to wealthy family cases riddled with secrets. It won't be cheap, kid. I'll pay double, I replied, sliding an envelope of cash across the table. But it has to be completely discreet. He nodded, and that was the start. A few days later, Victor called me at midnight. I picked up immediately, heart pounding. I've got what you need, his voice came low through the phone. On the exact day Mr. Augustus went to sea 5 years ago, Creed Kellen left the mansion early in the morning around 5:30. And he headed in the same direction as the old man's Bentley. A chill ran down my spine. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. You're sure? Positive? I cross-checked traffic logs and some old archived cameras. He returned home late that night, face ashen, according to an old maid I tracked down. I hung up and sat frozen in the dark. My father had been there. He had followed Grandpa into the forest. Every piece was falling into place in a terrifying way. But I kept up appearances. I still went for the usual weekend family dinner, even though every glance at my father made Grandpa's purple face flash before my eyes. That meal unfolded in the familiar heavy atmosphere. Dad at the head of the table, slicing his steak with surgical precision. Mom beside him, trying to keep the conversation light with questions about the weather and health. When Dad retired early to his room because he was tired, I saw my chance. I turned to Mom, voice soft but firm. "Mom, before Grandpa disappeared, was there anything unusual? Anything you've never told me?" Mom froze, knife and fork suspended in midair. She looked at me for a long moment, her warm brown eyes suddenly filled with sadness. "Why are you suddenly asking about old things, Trevor?" I just miss him, Mom. I want to know more about him." She sighed, set down her utensils and gazed out the window where rain was falling lightly again. About a week before Grandpa went fishing and never came back, there was a huge argument between Grandpa, Uncle Brandon, and your father. My heart pounded. "What was the argument about, Mom?" She hesitated, voice trembling. "I only overheard bits because I was outside the door. About inheritance, about Grandpa planning to change some important documents. Uncle Brandon and your father were yelling loudly, saying Grandpa was destroying the family. Grandpa was adamant, saying it had to be done to protect the family's future. The tension was so thick I didn't dare go in. I just slipped away quietly. Then, Grandpa disappeared. Hearing Uncle Brandon's name, I went rigid. My uncle, Brandon Kellen, Dad's younger brother, the one who always smiled but had cold eyes, who ran the Kellen retail branch in California and rarely visited. A horrifying suspicion gripped me. This crime wasn't the work of just one person, not just my father, Uncle too. I didn't wait any longer. The next morning, despite my reeling mind and the dark circles under my eyes from sleeplessness, I drove straight to the office of attorney Jonathan Reed, the lawyer who had handled my grandfather's will. The law office was in a towering glass skyscraper, luxurious in the way that catered to the elite, but today it filled me with disgust. I stepped into the cold marble hallway, pressed the elevator button for the 25th floor, feeling as if I were walking into the enemy's lair. Mr. Reed's personal secretary, a prim middle-aged woman, looked at me in surprise when I demanded an immediate meeting without an appointment. "Attorney Reed is extremely busy," she said, polite but icy. "You can leave a message." "No," I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. "Tell him it's Trevor Kellen, grandson of Augustus. He'll see me." She hesitated, then picked up the internal phone. Seconds later, the heavy walnut door swung open and Jonathan Reed stood there, 70 years old, snow-white hair, gold-rimmed glasses, impeccably tailored gray suit. But I noticed the change immediately. His eyes darted away, his shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying an invisible burden. He spoke, striving for calm. "Trevor, come into my office." The office was expansive, with a view of Elliott Bay sparkling under Seattle's rare sunshine, but I didn't care. I sat in the leather chair opposite his desk, staring straight into his eyes. "I want to ask about Grandpa's will." I cut to the chase, no beating around the bush. "The real one." Mr. Reed went pale instantly. He set down his pen, forcing an awkward smile. "Trevor, everything about Mr. Augustus's will has been clear for years. The final will was publicly disclosed. Inheritance rights belong to your father and Uncle Brandon. Everything is transparent, fully legal. You don't need to worry about it." "Transparent?" I repeated, voice cold as ice. "Mr. Reed, I know everything. I know Grandpa was murdered. I know my father and uncle are behind it all. And I know you're the only one still alive who knows the full truth. If you don't talk, I'll sue you as an accomplice for concealing a murder." The air in the room suddenly froze solid. Mr. Reed's face turned ashen as paper, his trembling hand pulling his glasses down his nose, his aged eyes wide with terror. He stared at me for a long time, as if weighing whether I was bluffing. Then he let out a long, defeated sigh, his shoulders slumping as if releasing a horrific burden he'd carried for 5 years. How do you know?" His voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. "That doesn't matter, Mr. Reed," I replied. "I just need you to tell the truth. All of it." Mr. Reed stood, walked to the window, and gazed at the glittering Elliott Bay without really seeing it. He was silent for a long while before he began, voice shaking as if confessing before God. A few months before the disappearance, Mr. Augustus came to see me. He wanted to draft a new will, completely new. He said Creed and Brandon had changed, corrupted by money, obsessed with greed and power. He wanted to leave everything, company shares, real estate, investment funds, all of it, and control of Kellen Retail Group to you, Trevor. Because you were the only one in the family who still had a kind heart, who truly valued what he taught. My heart pounded. I was the sole heir. The entire billion-dollar empire that my father and uncle now held was rightfully mine. Creed and Brandon found out, Mr. Reed continued, voice trembling more. They confronted Mr. Augustus, screaming, threatening, pressuring him to cancel the new will, but he refused. He said he'd make it public if they kept pushing. Then, he disappeared. Just weeks later, he turned to me, eyes red. Afterward, Creed and Brandon came to me. They threatened me, Trevor. My family, my career. They presented a forged will prepared long before, just waiting for the day, and forced me to declare it the final one. In exchange, they gave me a huge sum, enormous, enough to keep me silent forever. I shot to my feet, the chair toppling behind me. You were bought off. You let my grandfather be murdered and said nothing. I was terrified. Mr. Reed trembled, tears rolling down his cheeks. I'm just an old lawyer, Trevor. I don't have the Kellen's power. If I spoke, I'd die like him. I left the office in a daze of rage and shock. My mind spun, my feet moving without knowing where. I was the legitimate heir. My father and uncle had killed Grandpa to steal everything. A few days later, on a stormy evening, Victor called urgently. I'm sending you a file, his voice tense. Audio from a private cafe in Bellevue. Creed and Brandon met this morning. Listen. I opened the file on my laptop, headphones clamped on, heart racing. My father's voice came first, low but laced with menace. Trevor's digging too deep. He's been asking around, even rummaging through the old man's study. Uncle Brandon's sneer. How much does he know, bro? Enough to be dangerous, Dad replied. We have to erase every trace of the old man before he takes this outside. The remains, the GPS, the fake will, everything. Silence for a moment. Then Brandon, voice cold as a blade. If he keeps digging, we'll have to handle him the same way we did the old man. No other choice. I froze, the headphones slipping from my ears. My father and uncle were ready to kill me, their own son, their own nephew, to cover their tracks. Pain, fury, and fear fused inside me into something monstrous. But in that moment I knew there was no turning back. I would face them, and I would win. The following days felt like living in a horror movie I couldn't turn off. My phone buzzed incessantly with anonymous messages from unknown numbers. Shut up if you don't want to vanish like the old man. You're playing with fire, you idiot. One day, when I opened the mailbox outside my apartment, I found a plain white envelope with no name. Inside was a photo of me taken from afar while walking with Ivy, accompanied by a note in glaring red handwriting. She'll be next. I trembled so violently I had to collapse onto the floor, crumpling the envelope in my fist. Ivy was getting strange calls at midnight too, cold, distorted voices. Stay out of Kellen family business. Back off, or you'll have an accident. She called me in tears, her voice breaking with fear, and for the first time I heard her sob like a child. We lived in constant vigilance, triple-checking door locks before bed, drawing all the curtains, turning off lights early, never going out alone after 8 p.m. I installed extra security cameras around the apartment, bought pocket pepper spray, and even considered getting a gun. But thought better of it, knowing that if my father and uncle wanted, they could hire professionals to make it look like an accident. Every odd noise at night jolted me awake, heart pounding, hand clutching the paring knife under my pillow. I realized the situation had spiraled completely out of control. I couldn't keep holding this ticking bomb alone. I needed a professional, someone I trusted absolutely. Martin Crowell, my college friend, a renowned criminal attorney in Seattle. I called him at 2 a.m., voice hoarse, and told him everything. No holding back. The car, Ivy's visions, the GPS, the remains in the forest, the recording of my father and uncle plotting to handle Ivy and me to silence us. Martin's only response was calm. Send it all to me. Right now. I did. Photos of the scene, GPS files, scanned copies of the fake will that Jonathan Reed had secretly photographed for me. The audio recording, Ivy's trance statements recorded again, even the threatening messages. Martin worked like a machine. In just 3 days, he compiled everything into a thick, airtight dossier. On the 4th day, he filed it with the U.S. Attorney's Office, requesting a special investigation into murder and evidence tampering. It's done, Martin called from his office. Now it's your call. Do you want to confront them face to face before the police arrive? I knew I did. I needed to look them in the eye one last time to hear them admit it, even if only through their gaze. I chose sunset to go to the mansion. The blood-red sunlight stained the lake behind the house. Cold wind whipped through the tall pines. I parked at the gate, stepped out carrying nothing but a small USB in my jacket pocket, the final backup of all the evidence. I rang the bell. The maid opened the gate with a panicked expression, as if she'd been warned. The living room was lit, but the air was heavy as lead. My father sat in the large armchair. Uncle Brandon stood behind him, arms crossed. Mom was absent. They must have sent her upstairs. Both stared as I entered without a word, but I could tell. They knew. They sensed what was coming. I stood in the center of the room, looking straight into my father's eyes. I know your whole plot, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. About Grandpa, his death, the real will, what you both did that day in the forest. Dad sprang from his chair like a coiled spring, face flushed crimson, slamming his fist on the walnut table with a deafening crack. You bastard, he roared, spittle flying. You dare slander your own father? You, useless freeloader, wandering photographer, dare accuse me of killing my own father. What do you want? Money? Fame? I'll make sure you die in pieces. Uncle Brandon stood behind, arms still crossed, eyes sharp as knives. Some things are better left buried forever, Trevor, he said coldly, if you want to stay in one piece. I didn't argue, didn't react. I simply pulled a stack of documents from my jacket, photos of the remains, GPS data, scanned real will, bank transfer receipts from Creed and Brandon to Jonathan Reed, and laid them on the table. Then the USB and more forest crime scene photos. Finally, my phone. Creed paled in an instant, but quickly regained his authoritative sneer. Fabrications. All of it. You hired someone to fake this, right? Cheap tricks from those trying to tear the Kellen family apart. Brandon ground his teeth, trying to stay cool, but I saw his fists clench until veins bulged in his neck. He hadn't expected me to have so much. I opened my phone, turned on speaker, and hit play on the final recording. Uncle Brandon's voice rang out crystal clear. If he keeps digging, we'll have to handle him the same way we did the old man. A heartbroken sob erupted from the staircase. Mom stood there, hand over her chest, legs trembling as if about to collapse. She looked at Dad, then Uncle Brandon, then me. Her eyes shattered as if her entire world had crumbled. Creed lunged like a wild animal, snatching for the phone. But I stepped back, eyes cold as steel. Pointless, Dad, I said. Everything's backed up. Already submitted to the prosecutor. Police are on their way. Brandon swore viciously, punching the wall so hard blood streamed from his knuckles, face purple with panic. For the first time in my life, I saw that arrogant uncle truly shake, shoulders quivering, eyes glistening as if on the verge of tears. Dad stood frozen, face drained of color, lips moving soundlessly. He looked at me, for the first time ever, like a real enemy. I turned and walked out, leaving behind Dad's roars, Mom's choked sobs, Uncle's curses, and a family shattered beyond repair. As I stepped out of the mansion, the sunset had vanished. The sky was pitch black, lit only by distant headlights, the police convoy racing toward us. I knew from that moment the truth had no way back. I stepped out of the mansion as the sky had turned pitch black, the biting cold wind slicing through the row of pines. Police headlights appeared in the distance, red and blue flashing relentlessly, sirens wailing through the night. I stood motionless on the roadside, hands in my jacket pockets, watching the vehicles barrel toward me like a storm I had summoned myself. The iron gate flung open, police cars surged into the courtyard, the rhythmic thud of tactical boots echoing on the marble pavement. I didn't look back. I only heard Mom's piercing scream as the door was forced open, Dad's growl cut short when handcuffs clicked, and Uncle Brandon's final curse before his head was shoved into the back seat. I drove home in absolute silence. No radio, no calls. Just the rain pounding the windshield and my heart thundering in my chest. The next day, the city exploded. Martin called at 6 a.m. They arrested Creed and Brandon overnight. Our file was airtight. The prosecutor opened a special case. Forensics is already in Snoqualmie Forest. I turned on the TV. Every channel led with it. 2 Kellen retail group tycoons emergency arrested for suspected murder 5 years ago. Remains believed to be billionaire Augustus Kellen discovered. Biggest shock in Seattle finance history. The investigation moved with terrifying speed. They cordoned off the forest, erected white tents, swept every centimeter with cadaver dogs and metal detectors. Bone samples, a rusted metal box, rotted plastic sheeting, scraps of dark blue shirt fabric. Everything carefully collected, sealed, sent to the federal forensics lab. Within 48 hours, preliminary results. Male, 70 to 80 years old. Died from hyoid bone fracture caused by strangulation from behind. Time of death matching Grandpa's disappearance exactly. No seawater traces, no suicide indicators. Premeditated murder. Creed and Brandon were held separately. Creed stayed silent for the first 72 hours, repeating only, "I want my lawyer." Brandon raged, slamming tables, demanding privileges for contributions to Washington's economy. But when Jonathan Reed, under prosecutor pressure and a final surge of conscience, entered as a witness, everything collapsed. Reed spilled it all. The real will stored in a Swiss bank vault which he'd photographed before being forced to destroy the original. An $8 million offshore transfer from Creed to silence him. And an old recording he'd secretly kept, the final meeting with the Kellen brothers right after Grandpa vanished. Brandon broke after 14 straight hours of questioning. He confessed everything. The plan luring Grandpa to the forest for a private will talk. Creed strangling him from the back seat when he refused to revert to the old will, digging the grave together. Wrapping the body in plastic, burying it, then driving to the coast to stage the scene. Creed sat beside him, face ghost white, silent, staring at the wall as if into hell. The trial opened just 3 months later, record speed for a case this size. The city followed every day. Media camped outside the courthouse, helicopters circled overhead, #KellenMurder trended globally #1 for 2 weeks. I sat in the plaintiff's row beside Martin and Ivy, watching Dad and Uncle in orange jumpsuits, handcuffed, led in. Creed clung to final dignity, silver hair groomed back straight, but he'd aged a decade in months. Brandon was wrecked, gaunt, dark circles constantly wiping tears. Evidence was overwhelming, airtight. No lawyer could save them. Sentencing day, the courtroom packed. The judge read steadily, voice cold enough to silence the room. Creed Kellen, life imprisonment, no parole. Brandon Kellen, 35 years, no bail. Jonathan Reed, 5 years suspended, permanent disbarment. He paused, looked straight at me, then read the last line. Per the restored legal will from the Swiss bank, all assets and control of Kellen Retail Group are awarded to the sole heir, Trevor Kellen. I sat motionless in the front row, hearing the verdict without feeling victory. Only emptiness. Dad looked up at me one final time before being led away, eyes no longer angry, just hollow hatred. Brandon sobbed like a child. The press swarmed like wolves. Kellen Empire collapses after trial of the century. Brothers murder father for billions. From power icons to lifers overnight. Kellen retail stock plunged 72% in a week. Employees panicked, customers boycotted, partners severed ties. I didn't save the company. I let it die as it deserved. I left the courthouse through a storm of flashes and reporters shouting my name. How did it feel to be Seattle's youngest billionaire? Would I forgive my father? Any regrets? I answered nothing. I pushed through, got in my car, and drove straight to the small lakeside house I'd just bought for Mom. I had won justice for Grandpa, but the price was a family utterly shattered beyond any salvation. After the trial, I never set foot in the Kellen Retail Group headquarters, not even once. I signed power of attorney to an international auction house and sold everything: shares, real estate, the classic car collection, except the 1954 Bentley. I kept it, not to drive, but as a reminder. The money poured into my accounts in dizzying figures, but it only left me cold. I established the Augustus Kellen Foundation, funneling 20% of the assets into it to support arts education for underprivileged children. Exactly what Grandpa had dreamed of but never dared pursue for fear of ridicule from my father and uncle. The rest I split in half, one portion for Mom, the other to live on. I sold the Bellevue Hilltop Mansion and moved Mom into a modest 2-story farmhouse on Bainbridge Island, a ferry ride from Seattle with a vegetable garden, a small pond, and lush rows of evergreens. The first time Mom entered the new house, she stood in the empty living room, gazed out the window at the shimmering water, and cried, not from loss, but because, for the first time in decades, she could breathe without checking if her husband was angry. "Trevor, thank you," she whispered, hugging me tightly. I felt how much frailer her shoulders had become. I returned to photography as if returning to myself. Long trips were no longer escapes, but healing. I drove my old truck loaded with film cameras, camped in the woods, captured sunrises on Mount Rainier, forgotten fishing villages along the Oregon coast, children playing in eastern Washington wheat fields. My first post-trial exhibition was titled What Remains. All black and white prints, no captions, just light and shadow. Crowds came not out of curiosity about the Kellen boy, but because they saw real pain in every frame. I sold out on opening night. The proceeds went straight to the foundation. Ivy stayed by my side through those months. She never left when nightmares jolted me awake, screaming Grandpa's name drenched in cold sweat. She was the only one brave enough to remind me I wasn't at fault, that I'd done the right thing. Our love was no longer romantic dates. It had deepened into something profound, resilient, like 2 ancient trees growing side by side to weather storms. We married on a spring afternoon at a small beach near home. No $10,000 gown, no French menu, no A-list guests. Just Mom, Martin Crowell and his wife, a few of Ivy's college friends, and Hank Mitchell, the old mechanic who teared up seeing I'd kept the Bentley. I wore a white shirt, Ivy a cream linen dress to her ankles, hair loose and natural. We exchanged rings at sunset, waves crashing as our wedding march. I looked into her eyes and vowed without notes, I'll spend the rest of my life protecting you and what we build, not with money, but with this heart. A year later, Rhodes Kellen was born in a small island hospital, 7.5 pounds, crying like a kitten. I cut the cord, hands shaking so much the doctor laughed. When the nurse placed him in my arms, I looked into his clear blue eyes and wept. For the first time, the name Kellen carried no scent of blood, just a newborn's hope and light. I devoted most of my time to Mom and our little family. Mornings, I brewed coffee for her, sat on the porch watching mist lift off the lake. Afternoons, I pushed Rhodes's stroller on walks, Ivy beside me, hand in hand. The simple life I'd dreamed of in my youth, no luxury cars, no mansions, no flashbulbs, now fit perfectly in my palms. One autumn afternoon, when maple leaves blazed red along the path to historic Lakeview Cemetery, I brought the family to visit Grandpa's grave. His remains had been reinterred with dignity after the trial, a simple granite stone engraved only with Augustus Kellen, and the line I chose. He taught his grandson that kindness is the greatest inheritance. I held Rhodes in my arms. Ivy guided Mom beside us. Saria wore a cream sweater, more silver in her hair now, but her eyes held a rare peace, as if finally freed from years of fear and guilt. I stood before the stone, lightly touching the cold surface, feeling as if I were touching Grandpa's hand from long ago. The painful journey flooded back. The Bentley, Ivy's touch, the forest, the remains, the trial, handcuffs, Mom's cry, all like a long film where I was the reluctant lead. "Thank you," I whispered, voice choking. "Thank you for teaching me to hold on to kindness. That true strength comes from facing the truth." Ivy squeezed my hand. Rhodes slept soundly in my arms. Mom stood silently beside us, tears rolling but smiling. Before the grave, I left a final silent message. I choose to live with integrity, contentment, and love. That is the greatest legacy you left me. I looked at my little family under the gentle autumn sun. Mom, my wife, my son, and my heart suddenly felt light, as if a years-long burden had lifted. After all the tragedy, all the loss, I understood. Not fame or fortune, but humanity, love, and kindness were what let me move forward steadily. Grandpa was right, and at last I was living as he taught.